Today on thetruthaboutcars.com, we're out here taking a look at the 2015 Lexus RC F. Now, the Lexus RC can be seen as the coupe version of both the Lexus IS and Lexus GS because this is sort of a hybrid vehicle. It actually shares about a third of its structure with the Lexus IS, about a third with the Lexus GS, and about a third with the outgoing Lexus IS C convertible. This is the F version, which is the high-performance version with a 467 horsepower, 5-liter V8 engine under the hood, and F is to Lexus what M is to BMW. To make an F out of the Lexus RC, there were some significant changes to the base RC. That includes not only the visual changes that we're seeing right here up front with this larger grille, these unique headlamps, etc., but also some structural changes to the body. In addition to the larger grille openings, we have functional vents down below, we have the typical Nike swoosh LED daytime running lamp, and these headlamp modules are unique to the RCF. It's a 3-module LED projector lamp. Now we get a base headlamp module that is very similar to what you find in the Lexus IS, and this particular lamp module is optional. What you can see from this angle also is that this whole module has a very unusual shape. It actually curves in right here, and then this whole thing is separate from the rest of the module. Although Cadillac's ATS does seem a little bit small compared to the current generation Lexus IS and Lexus GS, when they make coupe versions of the ATS and the RC, then they become right about the same size. So this is about the same size as the ATS V Coupe, as the C63 AMG Coupe, and the BMW M4 and Audi RS5. In addition to lots of F badging, we also get a functional vent right here on the side, slotted rotors both front and rear with upgraded brake pads and brake calipers. If you recall the Lexus ISF, there were relatively few exterior changes, and that's not going on in the RCF. Out back we have some additional lines going on with this unique bumper arrangement. We have a bicolor bumper with these quad stacked exhaust tips that have become an F hallmark. We also have a Nike swoosh style rear tail lamp module that mirrors the front. It also bulges out from the body just a little bit. Electrically operated spoilers are all the rage, so this one will pop up when you hit a certain speed or press a button on the dash. Under this hood you won't find a turbocharged engine. Instead you will find a naturally aspirated 5-liter V8. It's a little bit different than you find in the M4 or the Cadillac ATS. This 5-liter V8 produces 467 horsepower and 389 pound-feet of torque that is class-leading in terms of horsepower, but it is about 60 pound-feet below the M4 or the ATS-V. This engine is mated exclusively to an 8-speed automatic transmission, sending power to the rear wheels only. The only all-wheel drive entry in this particular segment is the Audi RS5, which also uses a naturally aspirated engine. Aiding the handling of the RCF is a standard Torsen limited slip differential in the rear. You can get an optional torque vectoring rear axle if you select a particular option package that also includes things like a carbon fiber roof. Interestingly enough, there's a little bit of the Toyota Prius under this hood, because to my knowledge this is the only naturally aspirated V8 engine that can also operate on a modified Atkinson cycle to help improve fuel economy. Switching between modes is handled by the variable valve timing system on this engine, which can control the intake and exhaust valves independently of one another. That helps fuel economy come in at 19 miles per gallon city and 25 highway, and if you treat it very, very gently, you can get about 28 miles per gallon or so on level highway. The doors are a combination of soft touch plastics, Alcantara, and carbon fiber trim. If we move over to the dashboard, you'll see that the majority of this is borrowed directly from the Lexus IS, including a relatively small glove box and this small infotainment screen right there on the dashboard. Moving down from that, we have dual zone climate controls. We have a very traditional console shifter. Our drive mode selector right over here for normal, eco, sport, and sport plus modes. We have our Lexus remote touch infotainment touchpad. This is probably my least favorite input method for a navigation or infotainment system. Then we have 2 large cup holders right here and a relatively large center console. Instead of the sliding ring that we find in the IS350F Sport, we get a fixed ring and a 7-inch LCD instrument cluster right there. You can tell what Lexus's priorities were because we have a very small speedometer there on the right. The display does change depending on the mode that you're in. And we have a thickly rimmed F steering wheel right here with control buttons for that display on this side, volume control buttons on this side. Out on the road, the first thing you'll notice about the RCF really is the steering feel. The steering feel is very communicative, it's very nicely weighted, it has very good feedback, it feels very direct. That really shouldn't surprise you too much because most people think that the IS has better feedback than the BMW 3 Series. That really does translate to this RCF as well. Now on the flip side, the next thing you'll notice is that the RCF is not a terribly light vehicle. This weighs nearly 4,000 pounds, and that is about 500 pounds heavier than the M4. So in terms of overall dynamics, I think the M4 is superior. This is of course a very tricky area and a very tricky line, because if you get the torque vectoring rear axle in the RCF and you're on very tight winding roads like we're on right here, then the RCF, even though it's heavier, will feel a little bit more nimble than the M4, although that feeling can sometimes feel a touch artificial because of the torque vectoring rear axle. Therefore, if you're tracking your car, it really depends on what size the track is, because if the track is larger and more sweeping, the M4 is going to beat the RCF every day because it's faster 0 to 60. We ran from 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds in this vehicle, which was a hair slower than the manufacturer tells us it should be, largely because traction is an issue out back. Same issue you're going to have in most rear-wheel drive vehicles, of course. The only vehicle that won't have that same issue would be the RS5 because it is all-wheel drive. Even though we don't have as much horsepower in the ATS-V or the M4, they're both going to be faster than this, largely because we have a much more advantageous torque curve, and we have about 60 pound-feet more torque, even though those engines are smaller. Braking numbers in the RCF are excellent because we have very large brake rotors that are slotted. We also have multi-piston calipers, both front and rear, and overall everything is decently oversized for a vehicle this size. With a 5-liter V8 under the hood, I was honestly surprised by the fuel economy in the RCF. Been averaging almost 21 miles per gallon, thanks largely to the Atkinson cycle on this engine. This is actually quite similar in terms of highway fuel economy to the V8s from Chrysler with their cylinder deactivation system. The real downside to the feel in the RCF is this 8-speed automatic transmission. Lexus has been touting their intelligent shift logic in this transmission and does work very well out on a track. So if you're driving it hard and you slam on the brakes and you go into a corner and you accelerate, etc., the transmission seems almost psychic in the way that it selects the gear. However, when you're out on your favorite winding mountain road like this in a normal driving situation, it doesn't really work quite as well. Lexus has lagged behind the competition when it comes to turbocharged engine development, but in this particular segment, that's not really a problem because the Mercedes, the Lexus, and the Audi all have naturally aspirated engines. And as a result, they also have the best engine sounds in this segment. This 5-liter V8 sounds absolutely incredible, especially when you get it up over 4,000 RPM, where it really sounds incredibly good. The sound from this 5-liter V8 engine is so great, I really wish that it wasn't quite as fast because since the sound is best over 4,000 RPM, you really don't get that much of an opportunity to really hear that incredible sound from this thing. It redlines just under 7,500 RPM, so it's just wailing right up there at the top. Now, the Audi RS5 redlines practically up there in the stratosphere, and it sounds even better, but in kind of a F1 car kind of way. Now it's time to start wrapping things up. For 2015, the pricing on the RCF starts at $62,400, which means this is the most powerful entry in this segment and the least expensive starting price. As tested, this model is $74,560, and most importantly, this particular model is lacking the Sport Pack that gives you the torque vectoring rear axle. The RCF may have the lowest starting price, but when it comes to value, the Cadillac ATS-V beats it because it starts at $62,665, but we actually get better 0 to 60 performance and we get that more engaging manual transmission. When you're pricing your vehicle similarly at $75,000, we get more feature content in the ATS-V than we get in this model. We get things like a heads-up display and an adaptive variable suspension system. Years ago, it may have sounded ridiculous to compare a BMW M model to any Lexus performance model, but the comparison is actually a little bit more apt these days than you might think. The BMW M4 is still a very good value in this segment, starting at $64,200, so they're quite similar there. And the current generation M4 is the most civilized BMW M Coupe that they've ever made. Civilized certainly doesn't mean slow because the M4 and the Cadillac ATS-V are notably faster than the RCF thanks to the extra torque. I also found the M4 more engaging than the RCF because of its 7-speed dual-clutch transmission and the available 6-speed manual transmission, both of which are more engaging than this traditional 8-speed automatic. Now, the 8-speed automatic is very easy to live with, don't get me wrong. It's just not quite as much fun as the dual clutch or the manual transmission. The version we've been taking a look at right here that does not have the torque vectoring rear axle, I think that it's a little bit slower around a racetrack than the BMW M4. Of course, there have been some independent tests, but most of those focus on the model with the torque vectoring rear axle, which does go around a track faster than the M4. And I really believe that because the torque vectoring axle really helps this car pivot around a corner, especially if the track is very winding. The most interesting option in this segment in some ways is also the most expensive and the worst value, and that is the Audi RS5. At $70,900 starting, it's about $8,000 more than this, and aside from the standard all-wheel drive system, you don't really get many more standard features in that Audi. The most interesting thing about the Audi, however, is really the handling feel, because the handling feel is definitely below every other entry in this segment because of the all-wheel drive system and because of the weight balance of the vehicle. Although you should definitely put the RCF at the top of your shopping list, after a week with the car, I think the Cadillac ATS-V should actually be one notch higher on your list, especially if you're looking for a more engaging ride with a manual transmission. The ATS-V is nearly 300 pounds lighter than the RCF. It's not quite as light as the BMW M4, but it feels just about as nimble. It is a decent value compared to the M4, however, and priced about like this, and I think that most people out there will be adding a few options to their car. It will be a better deal than every other entry in the segment. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes with thetruthaboutcars.com. Go ahead and click that subscribe button at the top of your screen, and I'll see you next week.